Welcome to the Book of Mormon Evidence podcast with host Rod Meldrum. This week's Come Follow Me supplemental study is Lesson 28, Alma 32 through 35. Plant this word in your hearts. We again welcome Dean Sessions, who is the scientific research and discovery behind the universal model, using thousands of peer-reviewed scientific journal articles to come up with all the research that's been done on the universal model. All 3 volumes contain a total of 32 chapters with more than 2,000 pages. In addition, thousands of articles from journal references and photos from around the world were used to help explain the concepts in each book. The Millennial Science Foundation was created as the organization to help teach and integrate the new discoveries and to discover ongoing research needed for the new millennial science. Dean and Danette, his wife, are the parents of 5 children and 10 grandchildren.
Now, interestingly enough, I have one of our dear friends is Chauncey Riddle, and I wanted to just really quickly. We've already had an opportunity to talk with Chauncey Riddle. He's in a previous podcast. But I wanted to kind of bring up here, this is who Chauncey Riddle is. He graduated from BYU, received his master's and PhD degrees in philosophy from Columbia University in New York. He taught at BYU for 40 years. He served as professor of philosophy, chairman of the Department of Graduate Studies and Religious Instruction, and he was the dean of the graduate school and assistant academic vice president. So this is an individual who has a lot of information, a lot of knowledge about academia. And he wrote a beautiful article, and you can actually get this from his website. It's chaunceyriddle.com. That's spelled ChaunceyRiddle.com. And so...
What's the title of it?
And the title of this is called Korihor, The Arguments of Apostasy. And I just want to, it has a couple of things here at the summary. We're not going to go into the details about this, but I really invite you to go and to check this out because it's so powerful. But he says the first part of the summary says, first, naturalistic empiricism or reliance on experiences of the senses to ascertain truth. While a case can be made for the value of our senses, they are not sufficient to grapple with such principles as justice or mercy, or answer questions about God. Second, humanism, or the belief that achievement comes through purely human devices. Okay, the values associated with such an approach are self-serving, indulgent, and independent of relying on God's grace. And then third, relativism, or the tendency to believe that regulations inhibit the freedoms that leads to happiness. The individual thereby becomes his own judge concerning what is proper. The Brother Riddle recommends 3 ideas to follow to avoid deceptions such as those used by Korihor. And so he gives some really great ideas here. And but we're not going to go into the details on this because there's just too much there. But I just finished up with the last couple of things here. So it talks about we should hunger and thirst after righteousness. If we want to not be deceived like Korihor, we're going to need to hunger and thirst after righteousness. We're going to have to live to learn by the Holy Spirit so that you can discern what is right and what is wrong. You'll have to also support priesthood authority. Because if the gospel is true, brothers and sisters, then we need to look at what does the priesthood say? What does our prophets say? What does the scriptures say? Do they match with? Are they in coherence with these other with the theories of men, basically, right? Well, if they're not,
we know which one's not correct.
Then one of them's wrong. And then number 4, we need to build the kingdom.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to do here with these podcasts, is to provide you with additional insights and information and give you an understanding of where you can go to get more answers.
Do you want to show it?
Oh, yeah. This is fantastic. So I've got Mike right here. This is...
Mike, you got this one you can show us?
I don't. Sorry.
Okay, here we got... That's okay. Here we got... Well, yours is the closest. Hold yours up there. Okay.
Want to go ahead and read it?
Okay. So this is from Chauncey Riddle, Professor Emeritus of Philosophy at BYU. He says, I commend this work for all serious thinkers and lovers of truth. The proof of science is not in who says it, but the physical evidence brought to bear in evaluation of our ideas about this physical world we live in. What is more remarkable and commendable is the breadth and depth of the scholarship which Sessions exhibits in his writing. That is from a 40-year faithful member of the church at BYU. And so this is not something to be trifled with. There are those who will laugh it off, who have tried to attack it already from BYU
before it was even came out.
But I want to bring out something that I think I've already brought this one other time before, but I'm just going to bring this out here. This is from Mormon chapter 8. Brothers and sisters, this is going to be an interesting thing for many of us who have read the Book of Mormon over and over again. I've read it dozens of times, and I never really saw this until about the last 2 or 3 years. And but this is that I want to just go to verse 1 first off in Mormon chapter 8, because I want to understand who it is basically that's saying this. It says, "Behold, I, Moroni, do finish the record of my father, Mormon." So everything up until this point was actually in Mormon's own words. Now here's Moroni is basically coming and kind of doing this. Now it's not 100% clear, but let's go over to verse 35, because this is critical. Brothers and sisters, it says, "Behold, I say unto you, behold, I speak unto you as if ye were present, and yet ye are not. But behold, Jesus Christ has shown you unto me, and I know your doing." So basically, this is either Mormon or probably Moroni is saying that Jesus Christ showed him us.
Yeah, both of them did actually.
And what did he show him? Well, he tells us that in verses 36 and 37. You walk in the pride of your hearts. You're lifted up in pride of your hearts. You wear very fine apparel, and there's envy and strife and malice and persecutions. This is interesting. He says, and your churches, yea, even every one has become polluted because of the pride of your hearts. You love your money and your substance and your fine apparel and adorning of your churches more than you love the poor and the needy and the sick and the afflicted. But this is verse 38. Brothers and sisters, this is where I want to have a little bit of a discussion here with Dean. I want you to think about this in your own heart as well. This is what it says. "O ye pollutions, ye hypocrites, ye teachers who sell yourselves for that which will canker, why have ye polluted the holy church of God?" So I have a question for you. Who is the holy church of God that Jesus Christ showed him was polluted? I don't think they're talking about the Catholics or the Baptists here.
No.
I think they're talking about the restored gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yep.
And notice he didn't say, "Why are you trying to or attempting to?" He says, "Why have ye polluted the holy church of God?"
Exactly.
Now, who was it that did the polluting? This is important. Was it the brethren?
Nope.
Not even close. He said specifically it was teachers who do two things. They sell themselves, which means they're getting paid to do it, right? For that which will canker. And what things canker? Iron, steel cankers, it cankers into rust. Basically, it doesn't last. Things that don't last are things that canker. Things of God don't canker because they're eternal in nature. So basically, these are people who are in the church who are being paid to teach things that are not going to last because they're not of God. They're not eternal.
True.
They're philosophies of men.
Yes. They're pseudo-theories. False theories taught as fact.
So, brothers and sisters, who are these people that Moroni here is desperately trying to warn us about that was going to cause this polluting within the church? Now, we're not going to say who it is. We don't know who it is. Probably you can guess some ideas. I don't think it's gospel doctrine teachers because they're not getting paid. Okay. It didn't say anything about the leaders. It just said there was the teachers. So who are the teachers that are getting paid to teach things that are not according to the gospel of Jesus Christ? That's what I want you to try to figure out for yourself. Who are these people? And why do I need to be warned about them?
Why is it important?
Why is that important? So,
especially for the youth.
So I want to bring out a couple of other things that are really important. So, for example, there was a probably one of the most devastating articles that have ever been written against the church was this one by Jeremy Rennells, and he called it. It was basically about he had all these different questions. It was called a letter to a CES
teacher
head or something. One of the top people at CES.
Yeah.
A director. A letter to a CES director. This thing has been devastating to so many testimonies of the gospel. So many people who read that are question so many aspects of the church. One of the main areas of questioning that happens is church history. Another one is the science aspect of it. Whereas, what about the creation? How do we explain dinosaurs? What about Promanga man? What about and Lucy and all this kind of stuff? Where's all that fit into it? What about the flood? How could that possibly be? How did you get 30,000 feet all over the whole earth of water enough to cover Mount Everest?
Right.
And then another big one is that where did the Book of Mormon happen? Why don't we have any evidence for it? Where's all the archaeological and linguistic and genetic evidence
for
to support
millions
the
of
claims
people?
Of the yes,
millions of people.
Right.
Right.
And all of these different questions, along with a whole host of others, are in this particular thing.
Right.
Now, I'm not highly recommending going and reading that because it's pretty powerful, because a lot of things we haven't had answers for. We haven't had really in the church. We haven't had really solid answers for many of these questions. So people have had to just go on pure faith. Is this true? Is this an actual history? Was Joseph Smith a prophet of God, or wasn't he?
That's right.
And so we've had to kind of go on just faith for a long time. My brothers and sisters, which is greater, faith or knowledge? And usually it's kind of funny. I've asked that question to literally thousands of different people in hundreds and hundreds of presentations all over the world. Which is greater, faith or knowledge? And most members of the church will say, well, faith is greater than knowledge. And then I have to remind them about that early morning in the spring of 1820.
Right.
When a young man went into a grove of trees with a tremendous amount of faith that maybe there was a God and maybe he would answer my prayer.
James 1:5.
Now, brothers and sisters, when he walked out of that grove of trees, he no longer had faith that there was a God. He knew him. And it was that knowledge that I believe that gave him the strength to overcome all the adversity, trials, and affliction that he was going to have in his life. And one of my favorite statements of Joseph Smith is this. He said, I knew it, and I knew that God knew it. He didn't say I had faith in it, did he?
No.
He said, I knew it, and I knew that God knew it, and I could not deny it. So when you have that knowledge, in fact, the only way you can become a son of perdition is when you have knowledge
and turn away.
And then you basically refute that knowledge.
Yeah.
So knowledge is the ultimate goal here. God doesn't have faith that he can do things, brothers and sisters.
No.
God knows he can, because he understands all of the physics and all of the laws of science that surround those things.
So I want to support what you're saying here as a second witness, because this is critical. LDS people have not realized that we're the only people in the world since Joseph Smith that have come to know what truth is. D&C 9324, truth is the knowledge of things as they are, as they were, and as they are to come. It's one sentence. You go online and look up truth, you'll find all kinds of philosophers and other religious people and stuff will have pages and pages and pages, but they never tell you what truth is. Okay? Joseph told us what truth is. And by the way, the universal model has, for the first time, what scientific truth is, which has never been shown before. But here's the point. Truth is knowledge. Truth is a knowledge of things, and then you got the past, present, and the future. Okay? So this is what's critical, is God literally is truth. This is why he doesn't have faith, like you were just saying, Rod. He knows things, and we are to what? Become like God. Therefore, we're to gain this truth. There's nothing in this life more important than two things: truth and love. Those are the two eternal things. Charity and truth go on forever. And this is why it's so important. We're not going to care about all the falsehoods that we learned in this life. We only want to know about the real things, not just spiritual things, but temporal, physical things, what's true. And that, folks, is science. That is science. You have to come to understand true science if you want to become like God, because he's the creator of all things, and that's what we're to become, is the creator of all things too.
You have to understand how the earth is formed if you're going to form them.
Not just that, but living things and how they're all organized and been organized. Not theories, that the scientists want to tell you, because that all leads you away from God, and it's totally the opposite. Evolution has completely been disproven. You and I went in, I'll never forget. This happened several times with Rod. He was my main researcher at the time, right?
That's right.
And I had him, I said, here's a guy, found an article, and a guy was very kind of pompous saying, oh, look, here's 29 articles all showing evolution takes place.
Speciation specifically.
Yeah, and
there is a truth of evolution, which
yes.
is the microevolution, but not the
right.
macro.
There's two types of evolution. Micro is what we see with a dog and all the other breeds of dogs, okay? You can have a dog this tall or a Great Dane bigger than you and I, literally, okay? And so we have the diversity of species is amazing, but within every species, that canine, the dog, is still a dog. You never see it change to any other species. So all the change within a species is micro.
And this, by the way, it's the most diverse species on the planet.
On the planet, the dog is, and there's a reason for that. I'll explain in the UM. But when you go to the macro, trying to say dogs turned into some other kind of animal, like a cat or whatever, that has never been observed in the laboratory or in wild.
Well, no, wait, just a minute. Okay, so but what about microbes? Because we have this coronavirus thing going on, right?
Let's talk about the bacteria.
And they talk about these how it evolves. It changes and it changes. They have to keep getting different things.
Sure.
And so forth.
And so does it change into a worm or a bacteria? Even no, it's still a virus. And so they've taken.
It's like a different species of dog, or a different breed of dog, not a different species of dog.
Yeah. Well, they've actually we have in the book listed the number one evolution experiment where they took this bacteria and it was over several decades. And we followed it as I've gone through. This has been 30 years of research. We've been following it.
I remember we found one of the articles we found that they were getting close because they were partway through the experiment and they're going. This is a bacteria that replicates every 3 hours, and they followed it for 12 years.
And then eventually
35,000 generations.
Years. Yeah, and then that went to another 40 years. They have been following it ever since, and they've kept track of all these, and it's still bacteria.
And they were saying, oh my goodness, we are finally going to prove, actually in the article, we are finally going to vindicate Darwin. We're going to show for the world finally an actual observable event of speciation.
Yeah.
And
didn't work.
It failed.
And so we have quotes.
This is the simplest life form that there is. It would be millions of times more complicated to change a big life form like mammals, for example.
Yeah. So they literally the time frame that they've reproduced the bacteria is many times more than they think ape turned into man.
Yeah,
many more times.
Humans and apes supposed to split about 25,000 generations ago. They went 35,000 generations with the simplest life form.
Yeah.
And found zero speciation. Yeah. It's still a bacterium.
Yeah, and they've gone beyond that now, so it's much further on that.
Yeah, that was years ago when we were doing this research.
So it's important to recognize we have, yes, you got to remember.
And there's still
15 years ago was when you were working with me,
right.
okay? And you started 20 years ago, okay?
Yeah.
2000, year 2000 is when I started. And that's when we started actually writing the universal
model.
You used to have hair. We both were a lot younger then, huh?
You still have hair.
Yeah, well, a little bit. But so, this is important to note that the evolution, they had a conference, okay? And in there we have the statement of the chief guy that stood up, and he said to everybody that was there, we have failed at the task that Darwin sent out us to do. And what that task was to show this tree. You have a trunk. That was the original
amoebas,
living organism that turned into all the things that we see today on the earth. Well, guess what? They thought that they'd be able to go in and connect all this with what? Starting in the 1980s, DNA. They thought we've done this. We have all their quotes in there. They were so confident with all this, and they counted their chickens before they hatched. And by 1990,
well, they just knew it was true.
Oh, they knew it was true. Yeah. Yes,
yeah.
And they said we don't need those fossils anymore. We knew that they never were real, right? we got the DNA.
Fossils just have to take a back seat.
They have to take a back seat. That's what they said in Scientific American. I have to take a back seat because now we have the DNA evidence.
Got the DNA now.
And sure enough, a couple of years go by, and now the chickens, they didn't hatch. They didn't hatch. They finally opened them up and there was no chick inside. They were infertile. Okay, all their theories of the DNA. Because see, when you see the DNA and you see all the species, we have them in the book, pictures in the book of these maps trying to show generations going to other generations. The tree. There's no middle branches connecting to any other species. No species can be shown it came from another species. Period. In all the millions of species. It's completely, DNA has refuted evolution completely, all explained in the universal model, and that's in volume 2.
Okay, so that brings us to another interesting question. I brought up the Moroni or Mormon chapter 8 because, brothers and sisters, we need to talk about a little bit about how this has been impacting the membership of the church, and specifically how it's been impacting this younger generations. Basically, from our generation on, there's an interesting quote. I'm going to quote quite extensively from this book. It's called "Faith Crisis: We Were Not Betrayed." Brothers and sisters, there was a diary that came out of an individual who was he was for 10 years
historian,
he was the church historian.
The LDS Church.
And then his diaries finally came available here not too long ago, and what is in those is absolutely just
astounding.
It's damning.
Yeah.
Because what we had was an individual who was the head of the church history department who had no testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ
And decided to rewrite it.
And he was determined to rewrite it based on a couple of things. So this is how this kind of stuff gets crept in. This is how Korihor started to get a hold of the hearts and minds of the people, and it started with the guy who was kind of he was the protege of this individual, and we'll go ahead and name his name because he has passed away. But it's Leonard Arrington. Now, a lot of people who have taken classes at BYU may, if you're our age, you probably may have taken a class from him. Actually, his protege was a guy by the name of Sterling McMurrin. I wanted to read you a little excerpt here from this is on page 98 or 96 and 97 in this book. It's called again "Faith Crisis: We Were Not Betrayed. Answering, Did the LDS Church Lie?" Okay, and this is what he basically is saying. So this is from Matters of Conscience, which is written by Sterling M. McMurrin and L. Jackson Newell. This is from 1996, Signature Books. He says, one of the hosts and primary organizers of a group called the Swearing Elders. Now, they actually started this group of progressive intellectuals at several of the universities along the Wasatch Front. So it wasn't just BYU, but also University of Utah, Utah State University.
Called themselves the Swearing Elders.
And they had this kind of it wasn't really a secret society, but they didn't really want, you had to be basically invited to be a part of this.
Right.
There wasn't an open to the public kind of a thing. So anyway, he was one of the hosts and primary organizers of this group called the Swearing Elders. He was Sterling McMurrin, a University of Utah professor and former teacher under the church education system, and a United States Commissioner of Education under President John F. Kennedy. So this guy was a highly regarded individual. McMurrin did not believe in the historical authenticity of the Book of Mormon. During the summer of 1952, McMurrin sat down with President Joseph Fielding Smith and Elder Harold B. Lee, remembering that he quote-unquote shocked them with his quote-unquote heresies. So this was a conversation that he had with President Joseph Fielding Smith and Elder Harold B. Lee. This is how he puts it in his journal. He says, I just laid my heresies out from start to finish. They didn't have to ask me many questions because I said, well, we might as well start at the beginning with Adam and Eve. I don't believe they existed. I don't believe there was such a place as the Garden of Eden. I think the whole story is a cultural myth. I don't believe in the fall of man and man's estrangement from God. They just sat there, obviously shocked, and waited to see what would come next. So I went on until I got to the divinity of Christ. I didn't believe in that either.
Of course not. Yeah.
Which must have been a major shock to them, but I pointed out if you don't believe in the fall, then there's no point in believing in a Savior.
Yep.
But I did say, I don't want you to think that I regard Jesus as just a great teacher. He was a man of enormous spiritual insight. I laid it out there so there was no mistaking what I meant. Then Joseph Fielding Smith asked, well, what about Joseph Smith? What about the first vision? Well, I was coming to that, I said, President Smith, my views are essentially naturalistic.
Meaning he's believing the scientists of his day. Yes.
Said he wanted to know what I meant by naturalistic.
Nature.
I said, well, some people believe in evil spirits. I do, said President Smith. I know you do, I said, and that's why I'm taking this example. Let's assume that someone comes into your outer office and is behaving very strangely. You might go out there and say, he's possessed of an evil spirit. Let's lay our hands on him and cast out the devil. But I might look at the same man and say, he's out of his mind. Let's get him to a hospital. The first explanation is supernaturalistic, and the second one is naturalistic. I told them as well that I didn't believe Joseph Smith had actually seen God. Well, we went from there to the Book of Mormon, and I assured them that I didn't believe it was authentic. Indeed, President Smith was shocked by this unabashed rejection of Adam and Eve, the historicity of the Book of Mormon, the reality of the first vision, and the divinity of Jesus Christ. He was also surprised by the denial of a spiritual realm by a member of the church, especially by one so intimately connected with the church education system. Traditionalists believe in the existence of a spiritual dimension, and for them, an understanding of its governing laws in relation to the temporal realm is essential. For progressives, including Sterling McMurrin, the spiritual realm was of little importance. Leonard J. Arrington he came up after that. He became known as the father of the new Mormon history. In other words, the old Mormon history given to us by Joseph Smith, Oliver Cowdery, and others of his day was not accurate. That the new Mormon history actually needed to change and take Joseph Smith down from his pedestal. They actually said that, and so they began to transform the church. Arrington served in the church history division for 10 years as the church historian. This is now from his own diaries, folks, so this is where we're getting this from. But Arrington disguised his true motivation to transform and revolutionize the way members view the history of the church.
Right.
And he got into a major conflict with what he termed traditionalists.
Yep.
The people who believed in the traditions of the fathers, who believed in the prophets and the apostles and the scriptures. And he got into some pretty serious arguments and so forth. Basically, it was almost like a war going on up at the church, the church administration building and so forth, because he was going after people like President Ezra Taft Benson, Elder Mark E. Peterson, Elder Boyd K. Packer, Elder Spencer W. Kimball, and others that he considered to be the old school traditionalists.
Right, who all became prophets.
Yeah. And then basically, so what happened was, I'm going to share with you a few more pieces of this. This is really critical, brothers and sisters, because we need to understand the modern day teachings that are so similar to Korahor's. So basically, this Leonard Arrington, so he grew up in Idaho. He went to University of Idaho. He refused to go on a mission, by the way. In fact, later on in his life, he actually admitted, he said, I only read the Book of Mormon one time all the way through when I was 13 years old, and I found it boring. So here is a church historian for 10 years, the top guy, and he admits, he claims that he only read the Book of Mormon one time in his entire life when he was 13 years old. So this is pretty damning stuff. But he became one of the swearing elders, and they became agitated by President Joseph Fielding Smith's book called Man, His Origin and Destiny.
Refuting evolution.
And the swearing elders were wholeheartedly pro-Darwinian evolution. Leonard Arrington also fully accepted the law of evolution in biological science. Where did he get that information from? In the book, it talks about when he went to University of Idaho, he was taught evolution by an LDS professor. Last name was Halverson, William Halverson, and that really he began to question his faith, because he was brought up being taught that we came from Adam and Eve, and this was our heritage.
Right.
We came from God. This is the first time he'd been introduced to these other ideas. Well, the long story short, basically, is that he went to the institute director at the time, and and he basically, unknowns to Leonard Arrington, was also an evolutionist. And so he basically told him, oh yeah, you just don't worry about the evolution thing, just go and learn all you can about it and don't worry about it. Well, by the time he finished his freshman year, he says that his faith was pretty much on the ropes.
Yep.
And so he began to believe in Darwinian evolution, which also led to then what they call Bible criticism, which basically the 5 books of Moses weren't actually written by Moses, but they were written later on, and they were just a conglomeration of basically a bunch of myths around the Mesopotamian area that people kind of glummed together.
The flood didn't happen.
Flood didn't happen, and any of that kind of stuff.
Just a local event.
Yes. So this is what he said about that. He said the swearing. Let's see. This is, let's see. He, quote, fully accepted the law of evolution in biological science. When outlying concepts or theories or intellectual constructs that have molded my thinking throughout my life, Arrington noted, quote, the law or theory of evolution.
Notice how he tries to call it a law, but nobody does, because if it was a law, it says there's a cause and effect. Well, what's the effect from what cause?
Yeah.
And nobody can show it. You can't physically, scientifically show this species came from this species. So they can't call it a law. That's why they still call it a theory.
Yeah. So he said, the law or theory of evolution, the earth is old, always evolving. Plants and animals are old, always evolving. Even man is evolving with God's blessing towards a better life. Charles Darwin and others, unquote. So then President Joseph Fielding Smith, the grandson of Hiram Smith and future president of the church, returned from a meeting in a church office building. He was discouraged by the tide of liberalism that was derailing the testimonies of growing numbers of church members. Quote, he says, I attended sessions of meetings for the institute teachers held in the assembly room. Now this is from Mormon History by Ronald Walker. Okay. Or no, excuse me, this is Joseph Fielding Smith Jr. and John J. Stewart, The Life of Joseph Fielding Smith. Anyway, so he says, I attended sessions of meetings for the institute teachers held in the assembly room on the 4th floor of the church office building. I cannot say that I was very greatly edified. Too much philosophy of a worldly nature does not seem to mix well with the fundamentals of the gospel. In my opinion, many of our teachers employed in the church school system have absorbed too much of the paganism of the world and have accepted too readily the views of uninspired educators without regard for the revealed word of the Lord. What to do about it, I do not know. It is a problem for the presidency to consider. He goes on, he says, it is a very apparent fact that we have traveled far and wide in the past 20 years since the death of his father, Joseph F. Smith. What the future will bring, I do not know. But if we drift as far afield from fundamental things in the next 20 years, what will be left of the foundation laid by the prophet Joseph Smith?
That's where we're at today.
It is easy for one who observes to see how the apostasy came about in the primitive church of Jesus Christ. Are we not traveling the same road?
Yep.
And this is from a future prophet of the church.
That's right.
He says, I was struck by the far-reaching dimensions of the LDS intellectual community and the extent to which these Mormon historians, although far from diverse than some realize, were gathered in a community not entirely unlike an extended LDS ward. All right, let me see here. Let me get there's a couple other things here that I thought that it's important that we bring out, because, brothers and sisters, what I feel like we're doing is we're trying to show some of the reason why, for example, in Alma, we're talking about this just not too long ago, but in Alma chapter 4, it said this. It says, this is from chapter 4, verse 10, and thus ended the 8th year of the reign of the judges, and the wickedness of the church was a great stumbling block to those who did not belong to the church.
Yes.
And thus the church began to fail in its progress.
Exactly. And that's what's happening today. And I just want to say that
the lowest growth rate ever.
Yes, in the last 20 years, I've had a chance to meet with a number of scientists, some in the church and some out of the church. And it's surprising to me that the ones that were supporting evolution and supporting ideas that go against the scriptures, that there was no flood, that the earth isn't 13,000 years, that's 7,000 years in the creation and 6,000 years that man's been on the earth. That's 6 plus 7 is 13,000 years. We show in the age model in volume 2 that this is actually a real number, that all the sciences from different fields, and that's why this is omnology, because we're taking science from all different areas and bringing that knowledge together and showing that this is true. Okay, what the scriptures have always said are true. The sad thing is, I have been in geology professors' offices, anthropology professors, in astronomy professors. My son, I had a son and a daughter who went to BYU, and I sat in their classes. And to hear an astronomy teacher up there talk about the Big Bang and teachers to ask the questions, well, how could this happen? Da, da, da. And the teacher just belittles them and says, well...
I mean, the kids ask the question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The kids are asking the professor questions with this. And the teacher just, belittles the students and saying, well, you'll come to understand more when you have my knowledge and everything, that this is how it all just happened. You just haven't read enough. Well, the problem is what they're all reading. You read the journal articles, and this is why we've been very blessed that you and I both have been able to research for years. It's been decades I've been able to go in and actually pull this information out. And once you understand it, that's why the universal model is such a blessing to us. By the way, we wanted to announce that if you want to get your own copy of the book, we're going to give you a special 20% off discount by going to Firm. You can see it right there. That's a promo code, and you can get 20% off any of the products on our website at universalmodel.com. So this is really an important aspect to realize, that these professors have been teaching that what the students had learned from their parents over all these years was not correct. They're teaching there was no flood. They're teaching all the age that you learn inside the scriptures, the 13,000 years and 6,000 years from Adam to now. That's all false. And guess what? There's no Adam and Eve, okay?
We came from apes and slime.
The bottom line is you're taking the creation out of the church
the
by
very
doing
foundation.
This is why,
yes,
you won't find that these science teachers teaching creationism. They can't go there. So this is why you have other Christians look at us and they kind of laugh, like, you guys believe in the Bible? How can you believe in the Bible when your professors at your universities, the ones in the know, are the ones
believe in creation?
They don't believe
in
the flood. They don't believe in Adam and Eve, and exactly right. They don't believe in the prophets. Okay, how in the world can they believe in Noah and that all of us came from his 3 sons? How can we be Christians? Exactly.
When that's what's being taught. There was an amazingly stressful for me event that happened at Utah Valley University.
Oh, yes.
About 2 years ago, called the Heaven and Earth Conference, in which BYU and UVU basically teamed up to offer to LDS kids this conference to reconcile the beliefs of evolution with the gospel. And every single speaker in that was all about, basically, they had main people from the biology department at BYU. It was such a big deal, this conference, that actually Newsweek actually picked it up. And they basically had a front page on their website article about how a Mormon professor is basically calling out all these other Christian professors that it's time that they get off this antiquated idea
and believe in evolution
of creation and get on the bandwagon of evolution. In fact, just this year, they were also hosting another conference where they went to, basically, they invited all these other Christian universities to come to be taught how it is that BYU takes our students, which are taught from the church about Adam and Eve and creation and so forth, and how they're able to then get them to twist their minds over to a belief that we came from apes and slime and fully understand and accept the evolution.
And they've done studies on the students. They used to only get a third of the students that would believe this stuff, but now they're over 2/3. And it's a big deal.
Well, they made a big deal about the fact that in the last 2 years, every single student graduating at BYU from the Department of Biology self-identify
as evolutionists.
As evolutionists.
Yeah.
All of them. They said, we are very successful at our ability to change these kids from they come back from their missions. They come back, they talk about the scriptures, they talk about Adam and Eve and the creation of the world, and then we are able to actually get them to fully accept that we came from lower life forms, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's all
not a problem.
Yeah.
But you're going to see that this has got a little bit of more of a problem when you see this is what happened to Leonard Arrington. He got taught evolution, he lost his faith, and then he became, this talks about the director of the institute there. That was actually George S. Tanner.
Just so you know, it's not just this individual. I've had professors.
Thousands.
Yes, I've had a professor at ASU, for example, sit in my living room. And I asked him, I said point blank, and he's retired. He was retired at the time, and he was in his 80s actually. And I said, so tell me, we became friends and so forth, and I shared the universal model with him. And he was having a really hard time with it because he says, you expect me to believe this, and I have to reject all these other scientists who accept magma, for example, inside the earth. And I said, well, all you have to do is ask the questions. Remember, all the hard questions are easy when you know the answer. Let's ask the correct questions. Who's ever observed the magma? Well, no one has. Okay, and I said, that's right. Okay, and what's the mechanism for there being heat in there? And I went through all these questions with him, and it was so hard for him to grasp what was going on because he had already accepted all these other people that were basically leaving the church, okay? And he had a son that had left the church, and he was a scientist. And he came to me to kind of trying to get some help because he knew his son, when you leave the church, then it's hard being a family member. It's hard in your dichotomy of a family and everything. And he was trying to see if he could find answers and stuff in this. And he had been featured. The way I found out about him is he was in the church news. He had written, this guy wrote Saints and Scientists. Okay, this was a book that he wrote, Dr. Wooten. And he was sitting in my living room, and it was a really sad situation when I asked him. I said, because he told me I wanted to know if he had a testimony. How did you come to know the church and the truth? And he told me when he was 20 years old, and how he had a spiritual experience that had stayed with him his whole life, and that's really where his testimony had come from. But over the years, especially his last years of his life, and he was teaching and believing all of this science stuff, I said, so let's go back 10 years ago versus today and tell me, honestly, is your testimony today stronger, the same, or less than it was 10 years ago, that Jesus is the Christ, that Joseph Smith was a prophet, all the spiritual things? Because he'd actually done a survey. He was sociology. He'd surveyed. Most people don't know this. Utah has more scientists per capita than any other state in the United States. Did you know that? The reason being is because we have in our culture this knowledge. It's important. It's in Doctrine and Covenants 121, I think maybe 19, where it talks about intelligence. The more intelligence we gain in this life, we can take with us and so forth. So we recognize in the church that gaining knowledge and intelligence and studies, and it tells us from all good books we're supposed to learn from the Doctrine and Covenants, right? Yeah. So this is part of our culture, and this is why we have all these scientists in our culture. Well, the problem is, here he surveyed all of them and found out that the scientists were not believing in Joseph Smith and stuff. And he actually came out and said, versus 10 years ago versus now, that his testimony had gone down. Okay, and he was grasping for air. Like, is this really true still? He was questioning where he's
causing him to question the testimony that he originally had. There's a lady she's a biology professor at BYU. She's a really sweet gal. Her name is Jamie Jensen.
Yeah.
And she did a lot of surveying. She's the one that actually put together a lot of this information, surveying the BYU students of their beliefs and so forth. After this conference, I actually went up to Jamie and I asked her a very simple question. I said, "Have you ever, you've done all this studying of the students during their BYU stay?" I said, "Have you ever actually wanted to see what the fruits of all this evolution belief is?"
Right.
Have you ever done a study to find out how many of your students that graduate and are now evolutionists, how many of them stay active in the church? And she said, "Well, we never really checked that out." I said, "Wouldn't you want to?" This is from Arrington's diary when he was younger. This is when he was still going to school. He says, "I am not the same Leonard Arrington I used to be. I can now make that statement with fairness both to my former self and to my present self. It would be well to compare these two selves at this stage of my college career. After almost a year of college influence and training, the major change has come about through my acceptance of much of the teachings of science in preference to some of the doctrines of fundamentalists.
There you go.
Arrington is referring to the traditional Latter-day Saint acceptance of the Bible as history. And he says, quote, I now accept the main outlines of the theories of evolution and behaviorism, both of which I formerly violently opposed.
Yeah.
Unquote. So his teachings as a child, growing up by his parents and through the scriptures,
I don't think he
were in direct opposition to what he was
Yes.
being taught at the university.
Yeah, and he's being a little pompous here. I don't think he violently opposed him. His parents, I agree, did. But he sat back and just kind of, oh, okay, whatever. So here's the problem, is the kids leave home, and maybe the parents are farmers or whatever it is, and they don't have the education that the kids got. As a matter of fact, some of these original apostles went back east. We didn't have PhDs. When Brigham Young came out, okay, there were no PhDs in the church, and we wanted to set up institutions. So BYU is just an academy. So to make it a real college, we had to get PhDs. And they sent several of our, that ended up becoming apostles back east. And the problem is those apostles, became apostles later on, learned evolution, and came and started believing it. And so that's where in the church we've had this problem from the very beginning, is from the corrupt, atheistic, back east science that was being taught. They accepted that, and it's been taught now at BYU and accepted. It was funny, when I was there, started in 1980, you didn't have it as much. By the time I left, though, by 85, it all of a sudden now become more and more accepted. One of the reasons is Henry Eyring. Henry Eyring is the Mormon scientist, and there's a book written on him, and his grandson, who wrote this book, now I think is president of BYU Idaho, wrote this. And what is
that? The Faith of a Scientist? Is that what it is?
No, that was Eyring's dad, I think. Okay,
right,
this
right.
is called Mormon Scientist. It's a red little book, and so this is about Henry Eyring, the elder. Okay, he was a chemistry professor. Here's a guy that literally in the book, it's their story. They talk about him. He's teaching chemistry, and a guy from back east comes to watch and see how he's teaching. He's teaching his class, and what happens? The teacher ends up leaving and documents that the most amazing thing to me was, I've never been to a chemistry lab before and never seen one piece of lab equipment. Well, what Professor Eyring was doing was teaching theory. It was all on this energy theory, where how chemicals were getting their energy. And he would talk to his students, get some ideas. He'd go back a day or two, ponder about it, come back, and they'd have more discussion. This was his operation. This is what he taught. And he was not doing the experiments, okay? And so this problem is his theory. If you read today, it's not in any of the textbooks. This is not a theory that is, it never became a law. See, it was only an idea, and it's all failed. It's all wrong. And yet he was put up as this big professor, did a lot of stuff. You know why he became so famous? He became the president of AAAS, American Advancement Association of Science.
American Association for Advancement of Science.
Yes. So he became
AAAS, yeah.
Yes, he became the president of this organization, which is an atheistic organization. Almost all the science leaders that are part of that are atheists. Now, he wasn't an atheist, but he became the president of it. And so with that background, you have to understand he believed in evolution. Okay? And like we show you in the book today, the scientists today know there is no evidence for evolution. So he was believing in a false theory. And the problem is, I won't go into all the dynamics of it, but he was, there was other members high up in the church that were part of, and he was very influential, let's put it this way. And that's what caused the change of a lot of what's going on right now in the church.
Well, this is from President Ezra Taft Benson. He says, and brothers and sisters, do you want to know how you can combat these false philosophies of man from entering the lives of your children, so that you can have a hope of them actually maintaining their faith through the traditional prophets and apostles in the scriptures? This is what President Ezra Taft Benson had to say about it. This is what he taught. He says, we have not been using the Book of Mormon as we should. Our homes are not as strong unless we are using it to bring our children to Christ. Our families may be corrupted by worldly trends and teachings unless we know how to use the book to expose and combat the falsehoods in socialism, organic evolution, rationalism, humanism, and so forth, unquote. Yeah. That's from the Teachings of Ezra Taft Benson. Okay? Now I want to share with you just a couple more things.
Notice the things that you said in there were not popular in his day, okay? Yeah, and this is why people were concerned with him becoming the prophet. And I remember that time when that happened. And the important thing is, though, the Lord is the one who calls the prophet. And so this is where you have people leaving the church because they're disagreeing. And once again, it's all coming back to the false philosophies of science. Yeah. And all you have to do is actually go in and read the actual articles, okay, in science and really know these. Most people don't have time to do it. That's why we've done it and gone through thousands of articles. I didn't finish telling you before you brought this up. There was one article that had 29 speciation evidences. And I had
Talk Origins.
Talk Origins, yeah. Right, .org. And I had you go back and pull up every single one of those articles. And it was so amazing for me to see that the bottom line is he had just taken the title of all these articles.
He just did a quick search and put in the word speciation, and anything that came up with the word speciation in the title, he put in the Talk Origins.
And thought they were all evidences for it. We went through every single one of these articles, folks, and guess what we found?
Not one.
Not one had direct evidence for speciation. That's changing one species to another, macroevolution. Not one. It's because it doesn't happen. How hard is that? So this is their religion. This has become the religion of the scientist who's an atheist today. They do have a religion. Everybody has to believe something's going to happen after this life. You can believe you go to nowhere if you want, but the point is you have to have a belief. And this is their belief. And they put themselves up on the pedestal to say that they know and all of us don't know.
Well, let me just tell you though that how this affected Arrington.
Yes.
Because this is his feelings about the first vision
from the journal.
From his journals. He says, quote, "It isn't important whether certain religious or theological affirmations are truths in a literal sense, or whether they are true in a symbolic or poetic sense. George Santayana introduced me to the idea of quote-unquote myth to quote-unquote mythical truth, which is a very satisfying concept. Religion may contain a symbolic and not a literal representation of truth and life. In the Mormon epic, one may believe in the first vision without worrying unduly as to whether God and Jesus literally appeared in person to Joseph Smith, or whether he thought he saw them in some mystical sense. Did the plates of the Book of Mormon exist in a concrete literal sense, or did they exist in a symbolic sense? I feel comfortable either way."
There you go.
So here we have Leonard Arrington actually questioning the very foundations of the church and the first vision.
Yes.
And it comes down to the historicity of the Book of Mormon. Leonard Arrington used biblical criticism to analyze the Bible, which he had read only once and did not enjoy it as a child.
That was the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, as this biblical assessment prompted him to reassess the Book of Mormon. Dissatisfied with what he read, he began his own modernist version of the Book of Mormon. This is from his diaries. Quote, he says, "I read about science and religion, about evolution, and about psychology and philosophy. At the LDS Institute from George Tanner, I was introduced to the higher criticism and the scriptures. Since there was nothing equivalent to the Book of Mormon, which I thought was boring and confusing, I determined during my first year of college to do a modern version of the Book of Mormon. In fact, I rewrote a few chapters in the first book of Nephi." Unquote.
How wonderful. Okay. Let's rewrite scriptures.
All right, but then just a couple of other quick things. Later in life, Arrington experienced anxiety and distress as he wondered whether the Book of Mormon actually occurred. In 1978, Arrington read a manuscript written by John Sorensen, later published as Ancient American Setting for the Book of Mormon. Arrington was converted to the Mesoamerican model for Book of Mormon, but still left room for doubts as to whether Joseph Smith expanded the text, introducing the 19th century context into the Book of Mormon. Quote, "A friend noted, I have pushed him," that is Arrington, before on certain things and got something of the same answer. I said, "Okay, Leonard, were there really Nephites and Lamanites?" He laughed and eventually said, Well, let's put it like this. That is a part of the great Mormon myth that we all hold to and all benefit from, unquote.
Yes.
And the Mormon
sounds like me.
Yeah.
Sounds like Korihor when he was asked directly, "Will you deny God?" And what did he say? "Oh, I won't deny God, but you don't know that He exists." And right?
Yeah.
Once, and so you can tell he doesn't know. Like Alma said to him, "What evidence do you have that there's no God?" Okay.
Yeah.
What evidence does he have that the Book of Mormon is not true? He doesn't have any. There's no way a human being could write the Book of Mormon. There's been so many studies. There's so many language styles. You and I have both been authors now. We have our style.
Yes.
Okay? The dozens of writing styles in the Book of Mormon are completely different. And we're talking, Joseph did not write all these. He simply spoke.
Translated them.
Yeah, he translated, but he simply spoke them one time. And here you have Martin Harris and then Oliver Cowdery and even Emma writing them down, okay, one time over how many months, okay? That does not happen, and you have a book that's the Book of Mormon. And so detailed in the history.
It took me about 3 years to come up with the first book that I did.
Right.
And that's with computers where we can go and insert something and take something back out and change it, and we have tons of people to quote from. Joseph Smith wasn't quoting.
I have dozens of editors that have helped edit the Universal Model. Dozens, literally.
Yeah.
And there's just no way that someone could receive the words, or let's say he's not a prophet, so he just spoke out and just made up the whole Book of Mormon. You take Jewish scholars today that read the Book of Mormon. What do they tell you? Here's all of these different writing styles that are Jewish sayings.
That weren't even known at Joseph Smith's time.
And I speak another language. Nihongo shaberu koto ga dekimasu. I speak Japanese. And when you have this dual language, you understand some things don't translate directly over from one language to another, right? You got Italian in your background. So, so what happens is we come to understand that these languages coming from the Hebrew writings, there's no way he didn't know Hebrew. He had a third grade education. He didn't understand this. So there's so many hundreds of evidences that the Book of Mormon is true.
Well, we need to finish this up here real quickly. But so the last thing I wanted to talk about: how did Korihor? What happened to him? Why was he deceived? Well, I want to share with you what is known as the Leonard Arrington's third epiphany. So during the winter of 1950, Arrington received what he described as a peak experience while working on his doctoral dissertation. It's also known as his third epiphany. This is the third time this has happened. Arrington recorded that the event sealed my devotion to Latter-day Saint history. So he was devoted to the history, but he never did really have a testimony of the gospel. While he was reviewing notes from letters, diaries, and personal histories of the hundreds of past church leaders and members, Arrington recalled that he felt a feeling of ecstasy come over him, and in mystic language reminiscent of his earlier epiphany, he wrote of, quote, an exhilaration that transported me once again to a higher level of consciousness, unquote. Arrington interpreted the experience as God telling him that his, quote, research efforts were compatible with the divine restoration of the church, unquote. Basically, more than simply writing history,
used to rewrite.
Arrington believed that he had been called to create a movement within the walls of his scholarly domain that would revolutionize Latter-day Saint history.
Yep.
He would accomplish this by changing and reshaping how Joseph Smith was portrayed, how the restoration really came about, and what it meant, or what he thought it should mean, to be a Latter-day Saint.
Right.
Leonard Arrington, Mark Hoffman, Vaughn Brody, Juanita Brooks, and others shared the ultimate goal. They wanted to change history, each in their own way. They wanted to move attitudes away from the traditionalist perspective advocated by historians such as President Wilford Woodruff, Elder George A. Smith, Elder Willard Richards, and President Joseph Fielding Smith, to one they imagined and hoped would move their progressive ideals forward. Arrington's epiphany occurred during the time he was involved with the Swearing Elders group. And this is what he said. Arrington believed that he had hit upon a silver bullet. More than that, he believed that his God wanted him to do this. And I quote this. An invisible higher power had now given me a commission, and the experience remained, and continues to remain, with me. An invisible higher power gave him a commission. Regardless of frustrations and obstacles that came to me in the years that followed, I knew that God expected me to carry out a research program of his people's history and to make available that material to others. Whatever people might say about this mortal errand, I must persevere and do so in an attitude of faithfulness.
Wow.
So feigning faithfulness.
And where did we just read about this just a couple minutes ago? Who else had the same thing?
Korihor.
Korihor had the same feeling.
So he believed, brothers and sisters, that he was called to change the early history of the church, that Joseph Smith, Oliver Cowdery, and the others had basically lied about it, whitewashed it, made themselves out to be these really heroic people who were without blemish and so forth, which is not true in the first place. But basically, they come out and say that one of their goals was to take Joseph Smith down off of his pedestal.
Yeah.
That was actually a direct quote from Arrington. So this is what was happening with this church history stuff. So if you compare this then with Korihor, in the Book of Mormon, we read the story of a man named Korihor, an ancient atheist agnostic who stirred up the people with his progressive beliefs. He is possibly the most colorful of all the Nephite antichrists. According to the story in Alma chapter 30, Korihor came upon the people of Zarahemla with new ideas about creation, about the existence of God. Korihor claimed to know that there was no anthropomorphic God and no literal Christ, that the traditional God of the Nephites was dated, and that new explanations and up-to-date interpretations should supersede old, outdated notions. For Korihor, the archaic priests and teachers of the past were materially motivated, power-seeking, and antiquated. In striking contrast to the traditional views held by the people for generations, Korihor argued in support of naturalistic clarification and theories that most during their time would have considered unthinkable. That this earth was created in a purely natural sense, that there is no convincing evidence for a supreme creator. When compared with the theories of Darwin, taught almost 2 millennia later, theories now deeply ingrained in modern education and taught by today's evolution-believing historians, a remarkable parallel materializes. When Alma confronted Korihor, a contest between two influential ideological leaders emerged, revealing two conflicting worldviews. Alma employed logic, reason, true science, and an appeal to Scripture in the ensuing debate, but could not dissuade Korihor. Finally, after Korihor demanded a sign, the Lord struck him dumb. Filled with terror and silence, the very power of God he denied, Korihor begged Alma to remove the curse from him. As he pleaded for mercy, he confessed the source of his deception, that he was deceived by a fallen angel through a spiritual or mystical experience. An invisible or perhaps indistinguishable higher power had called him on a mission to save the Nephite saints of their day.
Yep.
Korihor was not operating from mere intellectual skepticism. He had an experience, an impression, a call from supernatural force that sent him on a mission to change the Nephite church and to reclaim his people. And then this is the final, this little last couple of things here. The question is, whose testimony came from God? Alma's or Korihor's? Because Alma was also going out and preaching to people and so forth, and talking about creation and talking about all this stuff, all this traditional stuff.
They both were.
Each Nephite was going to have to decide for themselves. Brothers and sisters, that brings us to us. Many in the Nephite generation, watching and listening to Korihor, became convinced of the wickedness of Korihor and converted again back to the Lord. However, the Antichrist and anti-traditional narrative had already taken root. The grandchildren of that generation and the generations that followed were misled by the false teachings that Korihor had professed and suffered the consequences. One generation following Korihor's appearance among the Nephites, the Nephite church experienced a massive faith crisis. Yeah. Only a few years earlier, the church had experienced incredible growth and prosperity. The work of the Lord prospered until baptizing and uniting of the church many souls. Despite the remarkable faith of the people, the younger generation began to doubt as the philosophies of men like Korihor took hold, and they began to fall away in droves. So this is are
we seeing it today?
We're seeing it today. Okay, so the last last couple of things. Who are these Korihors, and have they ever been actually named? And the answer to that is yes. Elder Ezra Taft Benson identified these 5 people. He says, as a watchman on the tower, I feel to warn you that one of the chief means of misleading our youth and destroying the family unit is our educational institutions. Yeah. President Joseph F. Smith referred to false educational ideas as one of the 3 threatening dangers among our church members. There is more than one reason why the church is advising our youth to attend colleges close to their homes where institutes of religion are available. It gives the parents the opportunity to stay close to their children, and if they become alert and informed, as President McKay admonished us last year, these parents can help expose some of the deceptions of men like Sigmund Freud, Charles Darwin, John Dewey, Karl Marx, John Keynes, and others. Today, there are much worse things that can happen to a child than not getting a full college education. In fact, some of the worst things have happened to our children while attending colleges led by administrators who wink at subversion and immorality. Exactly. So President Benson identified these antichrists: Sigmund Freud, Charles Darwin, John Keynes, Karl Marx, and John Dewey. And so that's pretty much the
communism and evolutionism, and it's scholarly theories that all end up being false.
And they undermine the teachings of the gospel.
They undermine Jesus Christ, who is teaching truth. That's the bottom line.
Yep. So Brigham Young Academy had the final thing here, which is basically, this is what Brigham Young said that should happen at our, this is what he wanted for Brigham Young Academy. 7 things. And perhaps the day will come when Latter-day Saints will organize schools as President Brigham Young envisioned. Number 1, he wanted schools that expressly counter false philosophies, including Darwinism, Marxism, socialism, atheism, and so forth.
Yep.
Number 2, Brigham Young wanted schools that teach the doctrines of the gospel as contained in Latter-day Revelation to counter false philosophies. Number 3, he wanted schools where the primary texts are the standard works of the church, and no doctrines contrary to the scriptures are promoted.
Exactly.
Wow. Number 4, he envisioned schools where individuals with true faith in the doctrines of the gospel as contained in the scriptures and taught by Latter-day Saint prophets of God create all the textbooks and the teaching materials. And number 5, schools where the saints manufacture all teaching materials to ensure that the above criteria are met. So that's basically...
if you're a private school or a charter school, there's your directive.
Yes. And if you need to have a text that is written by people who are faithful members of the church, then I might suggest to you getting a copy of the Universal Model, Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3 when it comes out. And now, if you want to get a kind of a condensed version, this is a DVD, but it basically is an introduction to the Universal Model. It's about 4 hours long, so I will warn you it's kind of long. But it goes into lots of great detail about the project itself. But the book has so much more, but it's going to take a long time to get all that done. But it's called DNA and Dating Dinosaurs. And this talks about some of the experiments that we did with the
and you were speaking to youth.
And so
this
forth.
was a video of you in California, right?
I was actually in Idaho, and it was,
Idaho.
but they were mostly adults in this particular thing. But I've given it to lots of different youth groups and so forth.
Do that too.
And I tell you what, when kids see this, they will have questions that their professors can't answer.
No.
They will have answers that their professors don't even know the questions to, because it is so powerful and it makes perfect sense. It also feels right.
Exactly.
Because things that are true just do that.
Yeah.
All right, and then the last couple of let's see, I've said it about 3 times now. But the bottom line is, brothers and sisters, President Holland, in one of the first podcasts that we did, he did this talk. He called it "The Greatness of the Evidences." And he said that we need to have evidences, and he actually made this quote from Austin Farr. But this is the quote, and I believe this to be a true statement. He says, "Though argument or evidence does not create conviction, lack of evidence destroys belief.
Yes.
What seems to be proved may not be embraced." In other words, even if you prove something, people can still ignore it, right?
Yeah.
"But what no one shows the ability to defend is quickly abandoned. If we cannot defend the gospel of Jesus Christ and the creation of the earth and so forth, then people are going to abandon it. And especially nowadays when the kids have everything is on Google.
And there's no hope.
Yep. He said, rational argument does not create belief, but it maintains a climate in which belief may flourish. And I just love that quote. And so basically, I just want to finish up by Dean. So when it comes all down to it, the main purpose, as I see it, of the universal model is to bring people to a knowledge of the truth.
And when you understand what truth is, who has all truth, it really is to bring you to Jesus Christ, because that is, you and I both have discussed this in our patriarchal blessings. We have truth listed a number of times, and we both know that we came to this earth with a mission. And this is why we knew when we first met that first day that we would be doing this. We never dreamed we'd be doing what we're doing right now, but we knew the Lord had a plan for us, right? And this is why it's so important that each of us go to our children and our grandchildren, learn the universal model ourselves, and help them understand it. Help your children. My kids right now are all married. I have grandkids, 15 of them. And I am so excited that my children have all learned the UM, and they can teach them.
And their grandchildren, they're excited about science.
Yes, because they can understand for the first time, what's really taking place. And you go to school and they teach you everything came from nothing. Makes no sense at all. That's the bottom line with science. So we have to understand that ultimately this changes your whole being, and you want to have your children. They're not all going to pick it up. A lot of times it takes time. We have to be patient. It's just like the gospel is truth. And you have neighbors that you talk to. It takes 9 times on average, if they did it with a study, for someone to hear about the church before they actually will sit and listen. And it's no different with this too. But it will eventually spread to the whole world, because in the millennium, we have to learn true science. This is the way all matter was made, how everything in the universe is organized, because we're going to become like God. We have to know these things.
I just wanted to finish up with Alma's testimony to Korihor.
Okay.
He says, "Yea, and all things denote there is a God." Okay. Brothers and sisters, if the things that you're being taught, especially I want to address the youth of the church, if the things that you are taught in school are not in alignment and in compatibility with the scriptures and the prophets and what they have taught over time, just realize that all things denote there's a Christ. If what they're teaching doesn't bring you closer to Christ, closer to God,
it's taking you away.
Then it's taking you away. If you read the universal model, I think you will find that it will bring you closer to God by far. My testimony as I worked with Dean on the universal model for all those years became solidified because of the fact that I could see God's hand in so many different things. There are so many questions that remain unanswered that cannot really be answered unless you have an understanding of God and the knowledge that God has given us. So he said, "Yea, even the earth and all things which are upon the face of it, yea, and its motion and all the planets which move in the regular form, do witness that there is a supreme creator." And to that I testify, that there is a supreme creator. And he loves us. And every single aspect of this earth was created for us, for those his offspring, his children. From the atmosphere to the distance we are, the temperature ranges and everything else, it all was set up perfectly so that his children would have an opportunity to come down, receive bodies, and go through the earthly experience and become, which is his ultimate goal, like he is.
Well, I just want to leave with my final testimony too. And this really, when you read the very last of chapter 8 in volume 1, you're going to read about the universal flood. And at the very end, we talk about how the Lord knew in the last days that the time was to be sped up. And for that to take place, there had to be new technologies. And you today, right now, the reason people can listen to this is because we have electricity. Okay? And how is this electricity being made? It's being made on fossil fuels, mostly still today. And the Lord knew that all these fossils that were all created in the flood, and we demonstrate how oil is made in the universal model, we demonstrate how coal is made. And I mean, we're talking actual experiments showing it only takes hours or a few days to create these things. And it doesn't take millions of years. And these things the Lord had put in place for all of us to be able to enjoy today, of being able to have in the internet, be able to have computers, and to have what we do today. You had to have all these electronics have metals in them, for example, which are rare earth metals. And those rare earth metals were all made in the flood. The same with the oil and the coal and all these other fossils. They were made in the flood. These are minerals that are only found on the surface of the earth, and they were made in the flood waters. This is all explained, and by the way, they came from microbes that were in the flood waters. Microbes and water, these things are very important in all the fields of science. And it's exciting to me to see that actually the Lord prepared the earth, even the energy field that's around the earth. You know, when you're a kid and you see a compass for the first time and it points to true north, right? To the North Pole. Well, it's so amazing to understand that's not coming from a magnet inside the center of the earth. No, it's coming from a field around the earth. And this is an electric field, and we demonstrate in the universal model that there's something called a piezoelectric field. Rocks have electricity in them that are quartz-based. And when you move them back and forth, you're creating this field. And the tides, yes, the moon doesn't just move the waters, it moves the crust of the earth, which is floating, by the way. Geologists acknowledge it's floating. And this is so exciting because what you have is the Earth's energy field is being created because of the moon and the sun. See, the Earth wasn't just made out in space by itself. You have to have the sun and the moon. Without it, you wouldn't have these fields. Now, this energy field, if it wasn't there, guess what happens? The sun's radiation would fry everything that was living. Exactly. So these are things that the Lord put in place. It was not a random thing. It's much more complicated than a watch that you find just laying out in nature and think that it made itself. That doesn't happen, okay? It can't happen. And so these things all around us, like you just read in the Book of Mormon, and it says this in Moses 6:63 also, that all things denote that there is a God. Things above the earth, things on the surface of the earth, and things beneath the earth. All things testify that I am. Jesus Christ said this. So this is critical, and I want to just put my testimony in there saying that the creation is critical for each of us to learn and to become like God. We have to understand true science, and we hope you'll go to universalmodel.com and find these things in yourself. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today and to work together with you. This has been
we've had
wonderful.
We could go on for a lot. We have gone on for a long time. Basically, we could go on for a lot longer.
Yeah.
And this could go on for weeks and weeks. We've had some amazing experiences together. One of my favorite things that we've experienced together is to see the light in people's eyes as they realize. We've had geologists who've been 40 years, have been employed by and graduated in and so forth in geology, for example.
Just got an email today.
Yeah.
And
tell us real quick about the email.
Just the email I got today. His name is David Christensen. He told me, if you want to use my name, you can. And you have a good friend of yours.
Yeah. Well, Ryan Nelson, his father-in-law.
Yep.
Basically, he was telling him about the universal model, and he's a 45 years. He's a retired geologist
working in the field.
When Ryan was telling him, he's going, "No, this is complete bunk. This is ridiculous. It denies everything that we know about geology."
Yeah.
So Ryan and I were on a bunch of presentations in California, and on the way back, Ryan says, "Would you call my father-in-law and just kind of explain to him the universal model?" 3 hours we go through from all the way through from California and up into Nevada before we finish up in Utah. And by the end of that 3 hours, he said, "I think I just learned more about the geology of the earth in the last 3 hours than I have learned my entire life to this point." Because I was able to ask him questions that he really had no answers for and never even thought of. And then give him answers that no one had ever given before. And so this is powerful. This, brothers and sisters, can and will change lives.
He sent me a letter just 2 days ago, and I don't have it in front of me. Otherwise, I'd read it to you. And he's just finished Volume 2. He is so excited about it. He read Volume 1, this one, 5 times. Okay, and then finally...
It's only 830-something pages.
32.
Yeah.
And then this one, he's finally just finished his first time. He's getting ready to start it over again. So that's Bob Mill. But David Christensen, he called me today, and he sent me an email this morning. And he just says, I just see these false philosophies being taught. His whole world has changed. He's gone on Geo tours with us.
Yes.
We take tours and take people out. We've had
the Grand Canyon. We did that together.
Yes.
Well, that was an amazing experience.
Oh, it was such an amazing experience, and everybody on the bus was able to give their own personal feelings when we were all done of the experience. And it was just, the spirit was so strong. It was just beaming. And he came out right out and says, I did not have this experience when I went on a tour with
BYU.
With BYU Geological Society, because he's part of it. That's where he graduated from. He goes, this is a completely different experience. He goes, this is the truth. And he is so excited about the universal model. I just can't tell you. And it's a thrill to see people that are professionals in that field that are catching the vision.
And there's professionals in every different field as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's wrap up here. So basically, the book I was quoting from a lot was Faith Crisis. We Were Not Betrayed by Hannah and James Stoddard. Answering did the LDS Church lie? The answer to that, of course, is no, it did not lie. We also using the annotated edition of the Book of Mormon, which we hope if you don't already have a copy of, you can get that. In fact, we just got the reorders now from Deseret Book and Costco stores and so forth. So they have been out since the coronavirus happened. They were sold out. And they didn't run the order anymore until they knew what was going to happen, if they were going to be open or closed. So now they're now going back into stores. We also have them at our website at bookofmormonevidence.org, which is where that's kind of the where everything is at. The quickie version of the introduction to the universal model is the DNA and dating dinosaurs, which is about a 4-hour presentation. Brothers and sisters, we hope this is you've enjoyed this. It's been long, but hopefully you've learned some exciting things here. We want to thank also. I want to shout out to Russ Barlow, who helped with a lot of these different things. He's the main was the main editor here of the Universal Models 1 and 2. And he's also helped to work on the editing of this book as well. So thank you, Russ, as well. We will be talking to you next week. We are excited about. We have some incredible guests lined up here, and so stay tuned, everybody. These are just going to get better and better.
If you like this Come Follow Me supplemental study, click the like button and share it with your friends. You can also send your family and friends to bookofmormonevidence.org, which is a hub with all the links that you would like to the podcasts, to upcoming events, the store, the 400 answers to the Book of Mormon. For this podcast only, Dean has been very generous to give everyone 20% off. The promo code is UMFIRM. That's for Universal Model and Firm Foundation. All capitals, UMFIRM. Thanks, Dean. Also, don't forget, this summer you can have a spiritual boost every day by going to bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com.